name is Joe Moore. I am a Director of Technology with the Office of the CTO, and I have been with Imperva nearly 4.5 years now. And my run at Imperva has gone from sales in the Southwest. Some of you I may have worked with before previously. I went from that to being an overlay, where I worked with the Cloud WAF specifically as an overlay for the US and then into the globe. And then I transitioned into the service provider role. So we have a service provider team that deals specifically with big telcos, colo providers like Equinix, CenturyLink, NTT, and Rackspace, and other ones like that. And then eventually became a GSA with some time in as a global solutions architect, and now with Kunal, Anand being our new CTO. He's created the Office of the CTO, and now I am a part of the Office of the CTO. My background, I was in the Marine Corps for a bit. For 5 years, I was an auto mechanic before that. I've always been kind of like a hands-on sort of person, really interested in technology. I went from the Marine Corps and I got a job with SAIC, and it was in the Border Protection Division, or BU of them. And in that role for 15 years, I kind of like moved from being a field sales guy, or excuse me, a field support guy, working on the equipment, to a help desk guy. And then eventually we made acquisitions, which brought me into more of a coding type personality. And again, everything that I've ever done in my past in relation to prior to Imperva has always been a support mechanism. So a service role, supporting customers and working with the actual product in a user fashion, not selling it or not strategizing on it. So when I came to Imperva, one of the first things that I did is that I noticed that there was a lot of these scripts behind the scenes that people have written to do specific tasks that may be, adding a lot of sites for a customer, that may be an iJump customer or a TAM customer, or running reports for them or whatnot. But there was nothing necessarily that was like an all-inclusive, here, come here, and you can do this. And so, in learning from command lines like AWS's CLI, I took that and I wanted to build something out that kind of mimicked that, so that we users of the command line, or people who do stuff on a tedious task by task basis, that don't want to necessarily log into the UI and go back and forth and back and forth, we could have that capability. And so when I'm going through this, I want everybody to understand that they can give their, I welcome, input and feedback for use cases, because I don't live in the world that you live in, where you interact with, potentially 500 sites, or, adding rules, or checking bandwidth and things like that. So I'm going to give examples of what I know and what use cases we've seen this being utilized for, and maybe some ideas that you guys maybe hadn't even thought about, and then maybe we can flip it over and have you guys give me some feedback on what you see or how you would consume this. In addition to that, this is an open source project, so it is on github.com, which you can see there, and you can access it, you can clone it, you can fork it, you can pull it down and do what you want, you can request me to merge backend changes and enhancements and things like that. But I want to make sure that everybody understands that this is not something that I feel like it's mine. I just feel like I started it, and it's a boilerplate or a kitchen sink of sorts that does not have all the bells and whistles yet. So moving on from that, like I said, what is this, the Cloud WAF CLI? It's basically just a command line interface that gives you the ability to interact with the Cloud WAF API. Version 1 right now specifically. There will be upgrades and changes to migrate and kind of like move over some of the capabilities to the V2 version that we're coming out with, or that we already have a few services or endpoints available with. And so I will start to build out that as we go, but effectively it gives you the capability of running a couple commands inside of a command line that you do not have to interact with the web. How does it work? Like I just said, it basically just consumes the Imperva Cloud WAF API. And if you haven't seen that, or if you're not familiar with that, docs.impervademo.com, or excuse me, imperva.com, and look at the Cloud WAF section of it, you'll see an API, and you'll see an API v2 as well. The problems that we're going to solve, I guess if you want to call it a problem, it's that mundane everyday task of you do the same thing all the time, and maybe you have to log in and you have to go from one website to the next website to the next website in the UMC, and so that can take a lot of time. Or you just need something that's ran on a monthly basis. I have actually taken this tool and I have other versions of it that I have the ability to um, consume the bandwidth utilization on a reseller account. So if you have the top parent reseller account and you have all the sub accounts underneath that, and you need to do reporting against all the bandwidth that those particular customers customers have consumed, that will actually generate an Excel report that will give you, all the different types of accounts, all the different bandwidth utilizations. It'll give you a tab that says this is the overages. So where this command line can go to is endless. How you get access to use the CLI. So I'll do this in sort of like a reverse fashion. Effectively, all you need to do to access anything of the API, whether it be via the CLI or if you wanted to do, use things like curl or write a web application, something like what Brian Anderson wrote with his Web Composer tool. With inside management of the account, you have the capability of creating the API keys. And for the API keys, it will obviously issue an API ID, and then it will issue you an API key. That is the only thing that you need to do or use to interact with the API itself. And in that, right, the same thing will be done with this examples or with this demonstration, this webinar that I'm going to perform for you now. In this demo, I want to not only consume the CLI, but I also want to exploit some of the capabilities that maybe a lot of you have not been familiar with yet or haven't used yet, such as the role-based access controls, right? So with RBAC, we have the capability of creating different rights for different users, right? So you have view only, you have readers. I have a modify site here. I have add site only. So this role gives limited access to your individual users that you will then allow to perform certain activities. And so this I learned by speaking with a customer that says, well, we want to allow a certain part of our users or a certain part of our business unit to only add the sites because they're a part of the CI/CD process, and then they need to be able to add the sites. But we don't want them to be able to modify it. So we only want people with security in mind to be able to modify it. Or if you have something that's more performance and cache related, you can have that setting as well. So I have two users here. And effectively, I've created these beforehand. It's not anything that's difficult. It's just something that I purely did out of time purposes. And so these two users, I will walk through the addition of their creds inside of my local instance. So, and if you think about this, if you use the AWS CLI, it's the same exact concept. I create a config file that basically lays down your API ID, your API key, what your default account ID is, what the end URL for the endpoint of the API will be. And I did that because resellers can actually do like a white label, so they can actually use their DNS to be the endpoint or their URL to be the endpoint. So I made that configurable, and then I also made something with a repo, which is locally, which we'll get into later. It allows you to do backups that can be laid down on a local disk of the entire site object, and all the bells and whistles that go along with it, like rules and data centers and whatnot. So that way you can actually do an archiving or a backup or a restore process at any given time. So having said that, this is how you actually consume it, and ultimately what you need. Obviously, the next portion of it is the install. All right, and so this is something that I've just recently done, where you have the capability of running a pip install, and this pip install is as simple as pip install CWAF-CLI. This install actually includes the dependencies, any dependencies that it has. And for what I've seen for myself, it works pretty well. I work on a Macintosh, so I know the Windows sometimes with Python and pip can be a little difficult with certain libs. But really, the only thing that I'm consuming and have a dependency on, I think, is the not only Python 3.6 and above, is the request library. So I don't think that there's that much that I've included in this that makes it special or that difficult to install. In addition to that, if you wanted to actually clone this and run this locally, we have the ability, you have the ability to go to the GitHub account under Imperva. And so the Encapsula CLI is located under here. You can clone this, and then you can start working with it locally. You can fork it and put it into your own account, and then ask for a merge request later on if you want to make changes and whatnot. Are there any questions so far as just the basics of what it is, how we're going to install it and consume it?
Joe, not as of yet, but if everybody, if you want to ask a question, please just put it in the chat and I'll make sure to ask. Thanks, Joe.
Mm-hmm. So if I was starting with a base install, you effectively see what I would need to do, where it's just the pip, and I use pip 3. I already have it installed, so it's not like I need to install it, but if I did it, I would just do a pip 3 install Cloud WAF. It would go over, you would see it, just deploy the dependencies and everything would be fine. Once it's installed, it actually uses the command line reference or an alias of NCAP. The reason why this is how I had originally written the tool was based on the whole Encapsula product line, which many of you may or may not know. This was an acquisition or a company that we brought back in, that we had spun out originally. It was called Encapsula. This is the actual Cloud WAF portion of our security portfolio, unlike our SecureSphere. And so I started out with the NCAP, and I always wanted something quick, right? So you don't want to have to spell out Encapsula or Encapsula CLI, or as you see on the PIP, it's actually CWAF. And out of all the determinations that we've made, we found that NCAP would probably be the best to stick with. So as everything, you're gonna, have a help menu, figure out what you want to do. I took the concepts again of what AWS did, and if you look at the resources and you understand config, site, account, infra, that will kind of align to the actual documentation of what we have for the API documentation on docs.imperva.com. So I follow that sort of nomenclature, and then below that you will see something that has to deal with what it is that you are going to be doing. Oops. Sorry, just got a call. Okay. So we'll do some site help here. So these are the capabilities and the operations that you can actually perform against a site. And I want to make this clear right now. I don't know the number. When I started this out, I wanted to do things that were a priority, simple things like adding a site, listing a site, deleting a site, adding a certificate, adding a security, adding a configuration, caching, like all those type things. So you can see the data centers, you can add an ACL, you can do a lot. However, though, there's a lot more within the API that is yet to be developed. And so I continue to work on and add and do more, but I wanted to start with the core features of it. So something like, setting the log level isn't something that I actually have written yet, even though it's super simple. It would probably take not even 20 lines of code, but I just haven't done that because I've been more so focusing on V2 and a lot of other cool features. So the first thing that you want to do when you actually come in here is you need to be able to do a configuration. So as we know, I've already created these accounts. So you need to configure the config so that it knows what your information is. And the way that we do that is I've already kind of like pre-done this. I have the API, or excuse me, the NCAP config command that I run, and then I want to push in my API ID, my API key, my profile, which this profile is something that I'll explain. It's the same thing as AWS, and then name it. So give it a name, right? So that has created the config file behind the scenes, and I could cat it. However, I have all my other creds in there, which I, for security reasons, and I'll be blowing this one away as soon as I'm done. So right now you can imagine that in that config file, there are a lot of different profiles, and one of them says API create. Now the API create has the capability of obviously only creating a site. I also want to create or have an API user that has the capability of doing a modify. So now within my config file, I have two profiles, one of them being the API create, one of them being the API modify. Okay, so how to manage the Imperva Cloud WAF services. This is where we'll actually start to, break things. If we want to go back and look at our websites, and you can see here, if we want to put it in order, first order. So these are our sites, and the site that I'm going to be creating and working with and kind of like giving examples of is going to be called cli.dev.impervademo.com. And I already have it set up in my Route 53. So I have it set up with an ALB. And if I did an NS lookup, I would, ultimately get that information back. But if everybody's ever added a site inside of the actual UI, you can understand that it's a kind of tedious process. You got to walk through this and hit the next, and then configure your certificates or whatnot. So we want to minimize that. All right, and at the same time, we also want to make sure that we use the creds that are only of the create capability. So once we grab our command line or our command, and again, like I've kind of pre-staged all this just for the lack of typing, but at the same time, the concept of the command line is to interface with scripts or like things that are already, predefined. So if you have a big set of something that you just want to iterate over, then you don't have to necessarily type all these commands every single time. You just, run whatever script, pass in whatever parameters you want, and then that way you can have all this stuff sort of just magically appear. So you can see how, quickly the site was created. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I did is I wanted to make sure that I made this as, reader friendly as possible. And so I take all this, and it's not a pretty print. I do all this in the code myself, but at the same time, for whatever I've given, and I've given as much information that I saw initially, would be needed or whatnot, there are more items or more keys that come back in the JSON, and that can be expanded upon. And I'm actually going to work through an example of that as we get deeper into this. So you can see here that do we have a custom certificate as equal to false, right? And you can see that the SSL is true. It's been detected. However, it's not necessarily enabled yet because, for one, I didn't upload it, and two, we have to go through a process of the pending approver. Okay, so what this means, or where this kind of like takes you as far as which route you're going with an onboarding solution, you may want to upload a custom certificate. Well, you have the capability of doing that via the API, and you have the ability to do that via the command line. So on the side, if I do this, then it will grab the local certificate that I have that I've already done, and it will upload this private cert. If I add if I have the site ID, come up here, grab the site ID, run this command again. Uploading the certificate, you can see that the uploader was successful. It gives you whether or not it's active. It'll give you expiration or whatnot. And so now when we want to, and just in case somebody picks this up, I'm going to go ahead and run this under the same context, or my kind of like admin context, so I won't be adding in the profile every single time. But if I want to check the status of this particular site, I now have the capability of going, and so now my SSL information is actually available, and it's set to true, and so we're getting a little bit closer, right? It's still saying pending sector approval. This is actually something that you can overwrite with the command line. So now that you've uploaded, you don't care about waiting for the Imperva certificate to be requested, applied through GS. You can just go ahead and do an ignore on that, and then you can update your DNS, and you can run your check DNS as well. With this status, so if we look at the health of it, you can see that you can run these tests. And these tests are those domain validations, which is for the actual global sign certificate that you would get, and you would apply as a DNS text record. The services means HTTP or HTTPS. That's what it will actually go out and find and determine whether or not you have it. And then the DNS is a check on whether or not you've updated the DNS records yet or not to point your URL to Imperva. So all of that capability is possible. In addition to that, because I like to help out and be as visual as possible, I also have a debug feature that gives you the capability of looking at the raw JSON that we get back. All right. So within this raw JSON, you will maybe find something that I'm not spitting out, not telling you about. You can see here that our custom certificate is coming back. You can see, basically everything that the site has on it for a configuration. Additionally, I also do the raw request and I print it out into a friendly curl request. So this gives you the capability if you're doing something else and you're using your command line, but somebody else needs to do something and they're using curl and you need to give them an example, you have the ability to come in here and grab this curl statement and effectively it runs the same exact thing. You want to do a pipe on it and do the JQ. So it's a little prettier, but effectively that gives you a little bit more power. Are there any questions so far?
None as of yet. Looks like it's very clear.
All right, cool. Right. So let's make something easier, or let's make it to where we're going to show the value of it, right? So within this little demo directory here, I obviously have my certs, and then I also have something that's called the sites file. So the sites file is, that easy little multiple site configuration or whatnot that somebody's handing you. Hey, we need you to grab these sites, and this can be anything. This can obviously come from an XML or Excel, a JSON file, making a call to another system, whatever it is. So we want to do something cool where we actually loop around this file or read through this file line by line, and we just want to pass in the actual domain and create the site as it goes. And so as this goes through it, you'll see that we can create 4 sites within the amount of time that it would probably take you to create 1 site manually within the UI. And as I look over here to my other side where my email is running at, I see the emails are coming in and confirming that it's all being created, in addition to the outputs that we're getting here. All right. So again, we want to run our in-cap site list, and I want to do a grep on the anything that's dev.imperva.
Out of curiosity, you said that you added 4 sites, or you can add 4 sites. Is there a number of sites that you're allowed to add? I mean, is it, limited, or?
The only limitation is based on whatever your subscription is. Okay. So there is no limit as long as you have the correct amount of or the allotted amount of subscription for the sites. And good question. So one of the things that's under the account is the actual is the subscription details. And so this is one of those ones where I haven't done the friendly print on it, right? And if you wanted to, you can quickly come in here and you can scroll to the top and you can see that we've purchased 150 sites, and we've used 26. So super easy, gives you all the account information. And if we had sub accounts, you can actually do that as well with the accounts. You have the capability of adding an account, doing an audit of the account, checking the account status, doing a list of all the accounts that would be for a reseller, and then doing a sub list of anybody who has sub, like our RBOC accounts or the sub accounts that are not managed, and then you can check the subscription of those. So all of those capabilities are capable via the account command. So like I showed before, I have our sites added, but I want to be able to apply a default rule to every single one of these sites. And if you go back, as Chris had referenced previously, to Kunal's presentation around the in-cap rules or the rules, security rules, he made a block rule. He wanted to only trust certain IP address. Okay, and so I'll kind of like read through this if anybody's not familiar with it. The actual context of the rule is right in here, right? And so what I'm saying is I want to do in-cap site. I want to add an in-cap rule. The name of that rule is block untrusted requests. The filter on that rule is a client IP of this list, right? And then I want to say an action of block. So effectively, this is what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to pass in the site from this for loop of me doing the same thing here. So I will do a list. I will grep it. I will look for any site that is pending status. And then I will grab the actual site ID from it with this awk grab, print the fourth item, 1, 2, I can't remember how it works, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, or it's one nature. And it will create that in-cap rule. So it's adding the in-cap rule. You can see the simple little status that comes back, and it says that it's okay, yada, yada, yada. All right, cool. Now,
So Joe, somebody mentions just kind of a comment. Probably a good idea to keep API ID / API key at least in env vars, and just pass them to incap CLI via the $var.
I knew I forgot something.
See?
All right. So let's see. Let me see if I can get back to it. That's a good call out there. And I meant to talk about it to the powers. So let me see if I can find it in here.
And then he also says,
add your configuration. Yes. So says, here.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it is a part of it. So we have the ability to consume 3 different methods of authentication. One, you can do the traditional AWS, config file, config.ini or whatnot, which is typically what I use all the time. Secondly, you can do the environment variables. So I could set all the environment variables and have them referenced here as Imperva IP ID, IKey, account ID, base URL, and the repo, right? And yes, for a lot of people who are going to be using systems to actually run this, versus a desktop like I do on a daily basis, this is what they're going to want to use. And then thirdly is you can actually pass it into the command line argument, and you can see that anything that we do has the capability of having the options. Oh no, it's not there. It's at the top. Sorry, but it does have the capability. Every single one has the capability of passing in the -- API _ID. So thank you for calling that out. The priority is environment variables. So if you have the environment variables listed, it will use the environment variables first. If you come in and put the config file in there, it will use the config file. And if you put the command line variables in there, it will use the command line variables. So you can think about it as an override scenario. So if you have the environment variables, but you pass in a command line, it will take that. Or if you want to do something where you use profiles from the config, it will then take the profile of the config, or it will ultimately take the environment variables. And just to show you where I have this listed at, we'll jump into the code a little bit here. I don't know why it does that. So I do a quick little, check to see what we have available. And so I go and I get the OS environment variables for the API ID. If they don't exist, then I go and I run the config. I grab it from the config, and I'm passing in the profile to look for the specific profile. So this is address, and I appreciate you actually reminding me of that, because I did have something in my head to tell you. All right.
No worries, Joe. So quick question. So seems like you're doing a incapable site, add incap rule. Maybe it's or incap site, sorry. And add incap rule without passing credentials. Does it cache these credentials?
No, this is the actual config file, and like I said, because I have my creds in there, I won't show it right now. But if you simply just did a cat that I lay down as in a hidden directory, this file right here, this is where you would see those creds that you configured it with. When we first came in and we did the initial configuration, that wrote your API creds to this config file.
Okay, that
So
makes sense.
it's not session based. It's not like I'm doing an export on it for the one time being and then consuming it. You could do that, but again, restart your browser. It's not going to be there. You'd have to put an export into your bash RC or something in order for it to be persistent.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And so going back to our list, we had created a couple of those in-cap rules. Everybody kind of saw them fly by and looked at them. So let's say that we actually want to look at the list of the in-cap rules for that particular site. Okay, so this is that rule that we created, and you can see that we don't have any redirect rules, forward rules, rewrites as of yet. And what I did here, so that you can see it, I made it friendly to the point that this rule can be copied out and then using the same command line that we ran before. So you go in-cap site, add underscore in-cap rule, and then pass in this string with the site ID. It'll then duplicate it. So if you needed to grab something from this site and put it onto this site, you could do that in this sort of nature. So it makes for moving rules around a whole lot quicker and a whole lot easier. So with that, I will try to. Okay, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to delete those sites. And I'm getting my emails and it's confirming that everything's being deleted or whatnot. So everything's good. All right, so in this instance, we've created sites, we've created multiple sites, we have updated multiple sites with an in-cap rule, we have uploaded a certificate. One of the other features that we have the capability of doing it is an export. And so within, I want to go ahead and create that site again. Not all the sites, but just the, okay. One of the things that I forgot to show, and I will give this demo just because we had spoken about it, is the capability of doing that modification. So API modify was the user that had the capability of actually doing a modification on a site. So we've created the site, and now that we have that site, you can see that our SQL injection is only set to alert. So I want to change that from alert to be blocked. But you can see here that I'm passing in the profile of, oh, did I just do that wrong? Of the API create. So this operation is not allowed, and the operation is not allowed because the create user does not have the capability of doing a modification on the site. So now we will actually do the modification on the site, and we can then check the status again. Oops. Cab site status. And now you can see that our SQL injection is actually set to block. And this is that same site that we were just working with. And again, you can iterate, and that was a demonstration to show you that the actual user that is given the permissions to create the site, so more of the operations guys, aren't able to go and modify the sites later on as much as the security folks would be able to do. All right. The last thing that we have is the export capability. So when I thought about the export, I thought about basically like a backup or an archiving process to say what happens when if I lose that site. So with the export, if I ran it just like this, you can see it's export site, or excuse me, in-cap site export, and I'm giving it a file name. Inside the config file, I've already designated my repo location, which on my scenario, I want to go ahead and back everything up to my repository with the backups. And in this, I already have a set of them backed up. You can see here that I already have this done. All right, and I want to back up just one specific site, which is the one that we're working with. And so I can pass in the actual site ID and do an override.
Hey, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good question here, actually. NCAP CLI versus NCAP Terraform module. Why go for NCAP CLI?
So Terraform is kind of, I'm not going to say userless. What I will say is that Terraform is a system that forces you to consume, the Terraform ecosystem, and it also, as of right now, has limitations. This came out, I think I started writing this code. The repository is over 3 years old, and so Terraform is just now for us starting to become utilized or exploited. And so within that Terraform framework, it's not necessarily such a small environment, for lack of a better term. You're usually tying in a lot of different pieces, and it's not even something that's necessarily used by everybody as much as maybe like a chef puppet scenario, depending on what their build process looks like, from the CI/CD process of doing a build, deploying that actual service, and then consuming or updating something in AWS. Not everybody is that big. So I wrote this in the mindset that I would give people that capability to sort of automate things with a non-Terraform, because it hadn't existed yet and at the scale. But great question, because we are super excited with Terraform, and I think one of the next presentations that I will be giving will be on the Terraform provider that we provide. We continue to grow it. I've actually deployed a complete Terraform TFE, like Terraform Enterprise or Cloud Terraform, to where now everything is, modules. And a good thing about the module is that you can make those reusable. So I create a default module, and then you have the capability of consuming that and just overlaying it and passing in whatever variables that you need for your site, your rules and all that kind of stuff. So it's something that we definitely intend on growing, but I think it's a larger ecosystem that deals with a lot more complex moving parts versus just a simple CLI.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Joe Brian Anderson actually did, I wouldn't say it was a Terraform presentation, but he did present a little bit on our very first community webinar in March. And he talked a little bit about Terraform. So another question for you. Can the newly exported configuration file be imported? And what if I need to help clients transfer their site from account A to account B?
So good question on the import. The goal of the export is to import it. Now, one of the things that I haven't 100% resolved yet is the full the full XML, or excuse me, JSON body of the site object. So that JSON body kind of like grows and contracts depending on what the users actually implement. So some customers may just have like default blocking rules. Other customers may apply actual security rules. Other customers may use like very complex NCAP rules or delivery rules. And so the delivery rules, when we get into that, it gets a little bit more difficult. Before, and like my original restore function, because there is a restore function, will handle everything with the exception of, I think, like data centers and NCAP rules. So if you had a basic site that just had ACLs and security rules, which now it's a little bit weirder because ACLs have been converted into policies, which I'm not managing policies just yet. You could do an actual restore, and you could also do a replication. So you could replicate a source site that you could pass in, and I think if you look at restore, so if you look at the restore, you'll give the path of where you actually want to restore. So the path of the directory, you would restore every single one of those exports that I just did, or you can actually pass in the file name that you want specifically, and then add in the domain, and that domain will then create you another or your new domain with the security profiles of the original export, if that makes sense. So that capability is there, the full-fledgedness of it, and depending on how complex your site is where a little bit of the, you know, I's and dot your I's and cross your T's exists.
Cool.
But I'm working on it, and you know, I encourage anybody else, if they want to, you know, continue working on that as well, they can do that. One of the things that I wanted to show within that export, and I think I have this on a different site. So I'm in my backup directory, and I think I have the ability to do. I deleted these before in the concept of the Git. So this is actually a Git repository. If I'm going to go and make a change to any of these sites, and then I would ultimately, you know, have those committed or whatnot, I could see the diff in the files themselves. So this gives you the capability of doing some change tracking. Whilst you know, have a security policy that may change, you guys might add a particular IP range to be blacklisted from your sites. So you want to add them all, and you want to export it, and then, you know, make sure and confirm that everything aligns with what it is that you say is going on your site. Lastly, I think I want to cover the build out, or excuse me, the expansion of it. All right. So one of the things that I talked about before was actually cloning and bringing it down myself, or looking at it myself. And so with this, I have a local instance. And when I run that local instance, I don't want to reference my incap alias anymore. I actually want to run the module specific to this directory that I've already cloned, right? And so you can see here that I cloned the directory, and I'm working. I've already, you know, made a couple of changes or whatnot. But effectively, this CWAF module is the same thing that you pulled or cloned, and now you're going to work with it locally. And I've already made a couple of changes, and I'll give you an example of something that I felt was something that I needed, right? And so currently on the deployed incap module, it doesn't give me any status other than the domain, the status, and the site ID. So I thought to myself, well, I want to understand what my log situation is. Right? Am I logging or whatnot? And so I now have the capability, because I modified the code to actually return me the log status. So now it gives me this log level, and this log level can be set to full, like I have here on this development site right now, or it can be set to none, or if it's not there at all, because like I said, sometimes the objects don't come back in the XML if they're not there, or the JSON if they're not there, then I obviously won't print anything. This is something that anybody can do, and an example of what this would look like is in the site log. So I took a concept of making this very modular and breaking it down per service, with, you know, a class being a site is basically just a general representation of the JSON object that's coming back. And you can see here that I have the log level that I've utilized in doing what we just did. So when I do that list, I create a table, and in that formatting of the table, I can actually add any sort of element that I want to pass in and use that. I have an array that gives me the list of the headers, and then I consume that information based on what it is that I'm getting back from each site object. So I do that in the site list, and so I come down here and I print it, and I say these are the things that I actually want to have in that list. But what also comes back, to have lost my keyboard. Okay. What also comes back, in some of this JSON is the log level itself. And so in that regard, you might want to, it would be right here in this section, you might want to consume that within the site status, right? And so let's do that. Let's do this one that I just created. All right, Zoom is not letting me. So let's do an NCAP site status with the log level debug. Oops. Sorry, I need to get the one that has it. Log level. So the log level on this particular site is equal to none, but it doesn't reference at all in my print statement, right? And so this gives you the capability of just adding in anywhere that you wanted to the actual print statement, so you could have that for yourself. So it's not anything that's rocket science for adding it in. Security rules, so do a little divide there, and then you could do a simple print statement of log level equals format, and then the self dot log object, log level object. And now if I supposedly ran this, somewhere in here should be my log level.
Too bad there's no Control F.
There is, but I'm debating whether or not I. This was the none one. Sorry. Hang on one second. Let me make sure I have the right site. Because if it's empty, it's not going to print it. Sorry, that should have worked. But you get the idea to where you can actually own this and manage it however it is that you want to.
Hey, Joe, I do have a statement and a question. So the statement is, and it goes back to when you were talking about importing and exporting, but one statement was care on the export import. My guess is that SSL certs, they don't get exported OFC. So
No,
sorry.
that is correct. Yes.
Okay.
So, and we don't have anything that would actually reference your certificate. So you see that when I added a certificate before, I actually do get an ID back, but that ID doesn't do anything. You can't move that around. So if you were to do a creation of a new site that was, referencing a previous one, or you were to kind of like to restore it, you would need to actually upload the certificate again. We don't maintain anything when it comes to the certificate, both across sites, nor when you delete a site. And also, in addition to that, for certificates themselves, you may upgrade your certificate by using the same key. When you upgrade that certificate, you also need to upload your own key, because we don't keep it. Once the certificate says that it's bad, even if it changes to good, we still need a new key for that. So now the keys cannot be moved around.
Okay, it's good to know. And then question, how do you determine what operations to implement support for in the CLI? And then with this kind of statement, of course, the API is very extensive, so not all operations will be supported here as well.
Yeah. A lot of it has been from basically in-house, use. So, like everybody kind of knows that you're going to want to be able to add a site and modify some of the site configurations. But I try to think about what consumers would do and how they're mostly utilizing us. And I think that a lot of the customers do those basic OWASP protections where it's ACLs or security groups, meaning blacklisting IP addresses, blocking SQL injections and RFIs and things like that, versus the heaviness of an in-cap rule, or versus maybe having the heaviness of multiple data centers and things like that, which I do have. But I haven't done things like, I haven't implemented simple functions. And it's weird because it's simple, but something like adjusting the log level or changing the storage location, which you can all do via the API. And I think that as of right now, unless I see sort of a demand, I will be focusing more on API v2, the extensibility of API v2, and then kind of like adding here and there type features for some of the things that remain on API v1.
Cool, thank you. And then go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, so that everybody knows, myself and Kunal are the ones primarily working on the Terraform provider itself. Kunal is the coder, and I do a lot of the prep work and the legwork for the outliers and the configurations and things like that. And I take sort of the same approach that I do with CLI with the TF, to where what's the most that's being consumed. I think there's probably 6 resources right now on the TF, and if you think about 6 resources versus the 99 API endpoints that we have or whatnot, there's a lot of growing to do. And so we're looking at what are the biggest consumers and what are the most requests that we see coming for the API, to put those into priority.
Great. Just a statement here. Feature to replicate in cap rules. There's no way to do that right now, and the policies have still a lot to go, but via the API, that would be easy.
Say that one more time.
Yeah, so the feature to replicate in cap rules, there's no way to do that right now, and the policies have still a lot to go, but via the API, that would be easy.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess if I'm going to take a stab at the API right now, would be the point. So where I actually give you that sort of friendly line that comes back, that gives you the capability of pushing it into another ad or whatnot. Unfortunately, I can't just get an object back as an in-cap rule and push that in to create another one like you can in V2, like with a JSON body. I have to break that all apart, and when I get it back, due to the nature of the encoding, I get a bunch of slashes, I get a bunch of double parens or single parens where I need to convert those. So it's really a lot of work, especially when you come to filters where people may have these long custom filters, and it's super difficult. In addition to that, how do I manage it to where I'm not duplicating it, to where if I can't just do a diff on it because something can be out of order or whatnot. We don't always get things sent in the same order. So it's difficult right now, but we are working towards that. And that is something that I actually just recently started to focus on with V2. So V2 does give you the capability of pulling the actual in-cap rule in a JSON format, removing the ID, shoving it into an add in-cap rule in V2 in the body, and then sending it back up. So that is going to be a whole lot easier. And so that I will take as an initiative to get done.
Cool, thank you. Seems like a lot of work to go do, but
yeah, it's not all that difficult, but we're there. It's and if anybody's looking to get into this and kind of like support some of the V2, I've already made the changes for the requests. So our API previously would only do posts, right? And the method that it would do, it didn't matter what you were doing. If you were getting information, updating information, deleting, everything was a post. And so now in V2, we've actually implemented, more of the methods. And so we're using the different get, put, post, delete for the CRUD function. So I've already implemented that in the execution of the rest. And so if you want to create something and you pass in the JSON body or whatnot, you don't need to worry about modifying the actual REST call. that will actually be handled by itself as you pass in whatever the param is for the post to get put and all that kind of fun stuff. So we're getting there.
Joe, thank you so much for all this information and all the work you've put into building this. Seems to me it's extremely helpful.